welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 318, Love at First Flight. The episode begins with Ash and the gang having come to a beautiful lake just outside of the forest that they had finished walking through. May found it very beautiful and calm, and Brock agreed, suggesting that it would be a great place to rest, and Ash agreed, along with Max, so they decided to rest there for a while. Brock then decided to look in his guidebook to find out more about the lake, and found out that it was called Lake May, which made May happy, as she thought that maybe the lake was named after her, noting how the lake was almost as beautiful as her. Although May was pissed off when Max stated that he disagreed and thought that May wasn't beautiful, stating that the lake was way more beautiful. As an argument between the siblings was about to ensue, Brock tried to change the subject by looking at his guidebook some more and revealing that the Lake May was particularly known for its crystal clear waters. May was very intrigued by this, and therefore she stopped talking to Max and focused on looking at the reflective waters, hoping that she could jump in the lake to embrace it fully. May then got angry at Max yet again, though, as he bitterly stated that would waste too much time on their journey, and he would much rather just continue on to Fall Arbor Town. Thankfully, before the argument could escalate, Ash interrupted Max and May this time, pointing out that something was hovering over the lake's surface. Ash was soon able to identify it as a Pokemon he hadn't seen before that had a yellow bow around its neck, and it was dipping its feet in the water, creating a beautiful ripple effect, and continued to create more ripples as it practically danced its feet around in the water. Ash wondered what the fuck this Pokemon was, as he had never seen one like this before, when suddenly May noticed another Pokemon they hadn't seen before, looking very similar to the Pokemon they just saw, but only being red, while the Pokemon that they just saw was purple. And they also saw that this Pokemon had a red bow on it, and it was flying across the lake, leaving the purple Pokemon to start flying as well, and join the red Pokemon up in the sky. And the two of them then started to dance around and bow to each other, playing a game together where they tried to basically outfly each other, although they didn't try and get too far away from each other, because they wanted to stay in contact. Brock then searched through his guidebook and was able to recognize these two Pokemon as Volbeat and Illumise, the red one being Volbeat, the purple one being Illumise. And upon hearing this, Ash and May decided to use their Pokédexes on the Volbeat and Illumise, with May scanning the Illumise and Ash scanning the Volbeat, so they both learned more about them. Just then, Ash and the gang noticed that the Volbeat and Illumise had gone back to dancing with each other, and Brock hypothesized that if they were dancing, then they must have been in love. Just then, a Nurse Joy walks up to Ash and the gang, getting their attention by calling out to them, and thanks them for coming to the May Festival, otherwise known as the Love Dance Festival, which involved a dance performance from Illumise and Volbeat. Ash and the gang were confused by what the fuck Nurse Joy was talking about, but Brock didn't even hear what she said, as he was just too focused on Nurse Joy's beauty. It was then that Nurse Joy explained what she meant, as she pointed out that Volbeat and Illumise had now stopped dancing, and have went back to their trainers, who were watching them, introducing their trainers as Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, I know, that's actually their names. But Romeo was the one with the Volbeat, and Juliet was the one with the Illumise. Nurse Joy then reveals that the Volbeat and Illumise were currently practicing for the actual show for the festival that they were putting on. Although Brock didn't even hear what Nurse Joy said, because upon hearing about Juliet and seeing her, Brock instantly fell in love with her, even more so than Nurse Joy, and went up to run towards her, although Max pulled him back, assuring Brock that there was no way the girl would be interested. And May helps pull Brock away as well, since Max couldn't restrain him fully because he was just so in love with this chick. But May reminded Brock that Romeo and Juliet were apparently practicing with their Volbeat and Illumise. Much to Brock's delight, though, Nurse Joy informed Ash and the gang that the practice runs were allowed to be watched by the audience, and pointed over to some bleachers where the audience had gathered by the dock where Romeo and Juliet were standing with Volbeat and Illumise. So Ash and the gang go to the bleachers and take their seats along with Nurse Joy. Once they were all seated, Juliet then introduced herself to the audience of people that had gathered, and promised to put on a really good practice performance, almost as good as the real show. As for Romeo, he just stood behind Juliet, silent and seemingly nervous, not wanting to say anything. Juliet then proudly declares that the practice show was about to begin, making Brock extremely excited as he tried to get Juliet's attention, cheering and waving towards her, although Juliet was too focused on getting ready. And Nurse Joy told Brock to shut up, explaining that she just wanted to watch this performance, because it was going to be really fucking good, and she didn't want Brock to ruin it. And Nurse Joy then reveals that there was supposedly a legend that stated when someone that was in love saw Illumise and Volbeat dancing, they would be blessed with luck, and maybe even have the person that they were in love with fall in love with them back. Juliet then stares at her Illumise on the pier for a little bit, but then informs it that it was time to get the practice show rolling, asking if it was ready, which Illumise confirms by nodding, and then the practice begins with Juliet pulling out a conductor's beacon, which was a large rod with a red light around it, and began to twirl it. Basically, this was a conductor mechanism that helped order around the Illumise, telling it what to do. And apparently, the way that Juliet twirled the conductor mechanism instructed Illumise to use Sweet Scent. While Illumise was keeping the audience busy with its Sweet Scent, Juliet turned to Romeo and said that it was time for him to release more Volbeat as part of the show. So Romeo grabs his fancy Pokeball bag and goes to send out 4 more Volbeat to join Illumise, but since he was so clumsy, his Pokeball belt falls off of him, and it spills all 4 of the Pokeballs all over the dock. This caused Juliet to panic, since it was putting the whole show off of flow, and she also got mad at Romeo because this wasn't the first time that this had happened. His bag that contained the Pokeballs had slipped off him many times. Romeo didn't want to be yelled at by Juliet by any means, so he quickly gathered up all of his Pokeballs, leaving Brock unimpressed with Romeo, stating that Juliet didn't deserve such a clumsy and terrible partner like Romeo, stating that Juliet deserved a man like him who wouldn't make her look unprofessional. May and Ash, however, had sympathy for Romeo failing, as May noted that Romeo seemed a little nervous, and Ash yelled him some encouraging words, stating that he knew that he could do it, and Romeo thanked Ash for these kind words, as he picked up the Pokeballs and released 4 more Volbeat, finally, and they flew up and joined the bow-tied one from earlier. Basically, the first Volbeat was the leader, who was nicknamed Beat. And although Romeo ordered Beat to lead the rest of the Volbeat to where they were supposed to go as part of the show, which was across the lake, but when the Volbeat sees Illumise, it got distracted because it was so in love with it, and started chasing Illumise around, making the rest of the Volbeat follow him. Romeo tried to order Beat to do as it was told, but Beat, much like Brock, was too enamored by his love for Illumise, and just continued to follow it. This made Juliet upset that the entire show was going fucking awry, as she ordered Romeo to get his grip and order around his Pokemon properly, not by yelling at them, but by using his baton. So, Romeo tries his best, nodding as he pulled out his baton, having to fight through, almost turning frozen in fear. Regardless, he tries to calm himself down and uses his baton to spin it around just like Juliet had to get his Volbeat's attention. But Romeo couldn't calm himself down, and as a result, he ended up clumsily dropping his baton to the edge of the dock, and it was about to go into the water and sink underneath. And Vito saw this, and also heard Romeo scream in panic because of the drop. So he flew down to catch it, knowing that it would be catastrophic if the baton was lost. So it seems as though Volbeat was now listening anyways. But anyways, all of the other Volbeat, of course, followed Beat, and in the process, they accidentally collided with Illumise, since they weren't watching where they were going. As a result, all of the Volbeat, as well as Illumise, spin out of control and fall into the lake. Ash and May were terrified for the Volbeat and Illumise, knowing that they couldn't swim, while Brock was just angry at Romeo for his clumsiness. Juliet was also worried for her Illumise, as all the Volbeat had tried to surface, although they were struggling to stay afloat, but Illumise hadn't surfaced at all, and was still underwater. As Juliet worriedly called for Illumise, Romeo came to help out, and at least comfort Juliet, but right as he did, Juliet dived into the lake to go save her Illumise from drowning, which accidentally knocked Romeo into the water. Since she leaned back to prepare for her dive, and since Romeo was behind her, boom, he caught the brunt of the force of the leaning, and went into the water. And much like his 5 Volbeat, Romeo was having trouble swimming, so May ordered Ash to hurry up and help him. So, Ash, as well as Brock, decided to help him as well, as Brock didn't want to face May's wrath either. So, Ash sent out his Corphish, and Brock sent out his Lotad and Mudkip, and the 3 Pokemon went in the water along with Ash and Brock, as they all went to save Romeo and all his Volbeat. As for Juliet, her dive in the water proved unsuccessful, as she couldn't find Illumise, although she did end up finding Romeo when she surfaced, who quickly grabbed onto her, attempting to use her to stay afloat, since she could swim and he couldn't. It was then that Ash, Brock, Mudkip, Lotad, and Corphish approached Romeo and Juliet, and Juliet concernedly informed them that she hadn't found Illumise yet. So Brock told Mudkip to go find it, and had Lotad help the Volbeats, who were struggling to stay afloat, leaving Ash and Corphish to help Lotad, with Ash instructing Corphish to go as fast as it could to catch up to Lotad. Corphish obliged, and he and Ash eventually arrived at the Volbeat, while Mudkip dived deep under the lake and found a light shining from the bottom of the lake. As Mudkip went up to this light to examine it, it found out that this light was coming from none other than Illumise's bow tie, and the reason why Illumise was not responding to Juliet was because it was unconscious. Back up above the water on the surface, Ash, Corphish, and Lotad had managed to get the Volbeats, with Corphish holding some, Ash holding some, and Lotad resting some of the Volbeats on its lily pad, and they brought them to shore. Mudkip then surfaced, having grabbed Illumise, and Mudkip, Illumise, along with Brock, Lotad, Corphish, Ash, and all the Volbeat returned to the dock, where everyone, including Romeo and Juliet, could recover from their near drownings. Some of the Volbeats, along with Romeo, had passed out in the process, and thankfully, with some resuscitation, they were able to regain consciousness. Brock, seeing an opportunity to get on Juliet's good side, hands her a towel to dry herself off, and as she does so, she thanks him. Although she was more concerned with her Illumise, who was still not conscious, although she was at least under Nurse Joy's care, with Brock's Mudkip and Lotad looking over it as well. Thankfully, after Juliet observes the Illumise under Nurse Joy's care for a little while, Illumise slowly woke up and happily flies over to Juliet, who hugs it gratefully. Nurse Joy thankfully confirms that Illumise didn't suffer any long-term damage, and it should be fine, but she suggested that her and Romeo head to the center so that she could give a more detailed checkup on both Illumise and the Volbeats to make sure nothing bad could happen, just in case. Juliet agrees and goes off with Nurse Joy to the center. And although Romeo initially didn't want to join them because he figured his Volbeats were okay, he decided to after Nurse Joy urged him that it would probably be for the best. This urging somewhat backfired on Nurse Joy, though, as it now made Romeo super concerned for his Volbeat, believing that Nurse Joy knew everything about healing them, so if she thought that they were in danger, then they must have been. So Nurse Joy had to comfort Romeo, assuring him that his Volbeat just needed a check-in, and Romeo nodded to show that he understood this. Although before Romeo left, he made sure to thank Ash and the gang for saving him and his Pokemon, leading Ash and the gang to admit that it was nothing and officially introduce themselves. Romeo then glazes Ash and the gang up, wishing that he was as energetic as they were, and also as passionate as they were, being able to save people that they didn't even know, stating that he could never have the courage to do something like that. He then begins to vent about the mistakes that he made during the show, including dropping his baton, and he gets so frustrated that he has to sit down, but when he sits down, he accidentally sits down directly on Corefish's horns, causing instant pain, as he instantly gets back up and tries to run around to shake the pain off, but by accident, he ends up falling off the dock into the water again, leaving Corefish confused, not understanding what had just happened, as Ash and the gang explained that Romeo was not that graceful of a person, just casually slipping into the water. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were spying on Ash and the gang and Romeo from some bushes. Jessie was the one with the binoculars, though, heavily keeping her eyes on Romeo, hoping that he wouldn't die. This led James and Meowth to come to the conclusion that Jessie had a crush on Romeo, although Jessie denied this, stating that Romeo was nowhere near as handsome as the Romeo from Romeo and Juliet, but James and Meowth teased her by reminding her that she didn't look as beautiful as the Juliet from Romeo and Juliet either, so someone like the real-life Romeo would be perfect for her. Jessie gets extremely angered by this and changes the subject, revealing that the only reason why she wanted Romeo to be okay was so that Romeo could instruct his Volbeat to dance, and then Illumise could dance as well, and she could see this and be brought good luck. James reminded Jessie that good luck was only brought to people who were in love, but this leads Jessie to clarify that she was already in love. Jessie then continued to look through the binoculars and ranted about how Illumise and Volbeat were currently at the Pokemon Center, because that meant that she couldn't witness their training with Romeo and Juliet, and Jessie worried that even if Volbeat and Illumise did return, then Romeo, being the incompetent fuck that he was, wouldn't be able to train Volbeat right and have it dance correctly. James agreed that Romeo certainly didn't know how to train his Volbeat correctly, but questioned if Jessie really was in love, still not believing this, leading Jessie to explain that she, much like Illumise, was desperate to find someone, stating that she knew Illumise wanted someone because of the look in its eyes, and she stated that she wanted not just a regular person, but a literal knight in shining armor, as she had a daydream of herself coming across a prince riding a Rapidash. Basically, Jessie wasn't in love with anyone in real life, just someone in her fantasies, and Meowth then cut into Jessie's fantasy, having a boss fantasy of his own, as he explained to Jessie and James that they could just steal the Volbeat and Illumise for themselves. And not only could Jessie just make the Volbeat and Illumise dance for her, thereby giving her luck, but Meowth suggested giving the Volbeat and Illumise to Giovanni, stating that they could entertain Giovanni with a dancing show, and because Giovanni would be so pleased by this, he would give Jessie and James promotions, and Jessie and James were obviously excited by this, so Team Rocket agreed to try and capture Volbeat and Illumise for themselves. And they all cheered for this plan, as Wobbuffet forcibly popped out of its Pokeball, as it usually did, to join in on the cheering. Meanwhile, back at the Pokemon Center, Ash, May, Brock, and Max had accompanied Romeo and Juliet to the center and watched as Nurse Joy handed Romeo his 5 healed Volbeats back, assuring him that they were okay. Romeo thanked her for his assistance, though couldn't remain happy for long, as he was stressed about the upcoming real show, since he was scared he was just going to mess up the act again. So, this led Ash and the gang to quell his worries by saying that while Juliet and Illumise were still in the ER, because Illumise was in a lot worse shape than the Volbeats, Romeo should take the time to practice with his Volbeats while Juliet wasn't there. And May added that it could be a great surprise to Juliet to see that he cared a lot to practice on his own, even without her, and stated that he should work to kind of prove to her that he was as serious about the show as she was, and show her what he had learned during his practice. And also, Ash and the gang offered to help Romeo practice as well, so Romeo cheered up a little bit and agreed to practice, although was still concerned. However, when Ash and the gang and Romeo arrived at the lakefront of Lake May by Romeo's house to train, Romeo suddenly appeared a lot more confident, murmuring that he only got nervous when he had to perform with Juliet and her Illumise, as he sent out his 5 Volbeat and took out the baton and twirled it, causing Beat to fly up, and the other 4 follow it in a straight line and then turn into a V shape. Romeo then twirls the baton, and the 5 Volbeats do a spin, impressing May and Ash, with Brock commenting that he was doing much better than before, and they all comment that Romeo wasn't as clumsy as he first appeared to be, and he was having no trouble directing his Volbeat, so they thought that he didn't need their help after all. But this just made Ash more curious. If Romeo wasn't super clumsy and was fine commanding his Volbeat, then why was he so nervous and clumsy this morning? So he questioned Romeo about this, leading Romeo to clarify that he was always fine when performing alone, but when he practiced with Juliet, then he got nervous, and explained that his leader Volbeat, Beat, got nervous when practicing with Illumise as well. With Romeo then complaining that he really wanted to be as good as Juliet at performing and didn't want to let her down, but it was hard, and Beto flew down beside Romeo and nodded, agreeing with Romeo, confirming that it got nervous around Illumise as well, leading Max to state that he shouldn't feel pressured to be as good as Juliet, he should just make sure that he was doing the best that he could, leading Romeo to rebuttal that when he was around Juliet, he just felt his need to do his best. This made May believe that she knew what the problem with Romeo was, and why he couldn't focus around her, and why he was so clumsy around her, leading her to ask Romeo how he felt about Juliet, and how he basically reacted when he was around her. specifically asking him how he felt when he was around her when they weren't performing, so that May could officially cross out the possibility of Romeo simply acting that way because of the performance. And sure enough, Romeo explained that whenever he was around Juliet, he got weak in the knees and his hands sweat. He started to tighten in his chest, and his heart began to race, and he would start to act all nervous and clumsy. And we then see a vision of this occurring from the perspective of Romeo's mind. Ash wondered why Romeo would act like this, suggesting that he should go to the hospital to cure whatever illness he had, but May claimed that there was no hospital that could cure Romeo, knowing that he didn't actually have a genuine illness, he was instead in love. Specifically stating that Romeo was in love with Juliet and Beat was in love with Illumise, after Beat clarified that Illumise made Beat act a similar way. And May then explained that all of those things that Romeo were experiencing were usually symptoms of a person's nervousness around someone that they loved. However, Romeo believed that he couldn't possibly be in love with Juliet, since he and Juliet had been friends since childhood. However, May explained even old friends could fall in love after a long time, and it actually happened a lot. And stated her belief that Beat likely also had feelings for Illumise, which Beat didn't even bother denying. He knew that it was true, so this just made May even more sold on the fact that Romeo loved Juliet. Romeo admitted that he did, so May advised him that the best thing for him to do to get rid of his nervousness around her would be to confess how he felt, leading Brock to got into the conversation and take May's advice, stating that it was a great idea for him as well, stating that he should confess his own feelings to Juliet, but May pushes him aside, saying that she was only referring to Romeo, not helpless dreamers like Brock, stating that if he admitted his feelings to Juliet, then it wouldn't help him in any way, shape, or form, since he confessed his feelings to people too many times, being the simp that he was. Romeo, though, was a little unsure and feared that Juliet would reject him, so he didn't want to confess, but May simply said that he wouldn't know if Juliet would reject him until he gave it a shot. And she then suggested that Beat confess its feelings to Illumise as well, so that it and Romeo could confess their feelings together, and Beat nodded, clarifying that it would have no problem doing this. Actually seemingly excited to confess to Illumise. Motivated by Volbeat's courage, Romeo agreed to confess to Juliet, but still was concerned over how he was going to do it. May disregarded his concern for a second, though, just happy that she had at least gotten Romeo to agree, as she blushed, very excited to help Romeo with his love problem. Cheering. As for Ash, he was wondering when May became such an expert on love, and Max clarified that she never was, and shouldn't be, as he personally found love extremely gross and boring, being the immature child that he was. Just then, May got an idea to assist Romeo, and came up to Ash, stating that she would need his help. Later that night, May had put her plan into action, as she had Ash dress up as Juliet, and pretended as if Juliet had come to Romeo's house. Romeo soon spotted who he believed was actually Juliet, and this led May to encourage Romeo to go and confess his feelings. And Romeo, although scared, tried to oblige as he went up behind Juliet, quote-unquote, and tried to confess his feelings of love, but was too stressed and nervous to actually say anything. So, May then secretly popped out from the bushes where she was watching, and tried to give Romeo some courage, telling him that a confession would be the best route, since all of his stress would be gone if he would just admit his love already. Romeo simply rebutted that he was too stressed about what would happen if Juliet ended up rejecting him, stressing that they would lose the friendship that they had, leading May to yell at Romeo, stating that she gave the fuck up, and Romeo would be dumped if he wasn't gonna just confess his feelings. Ash quickly got fed up with waiting for Romeo to confess, and was annoyed with May and Romeo's arguing, and took off his fake Juliet disguise, yelling that he wasn't gonna wait all day, making Romeo realize that this Juliet wasn't even real, it was just Ash dressed up as Juliet. As May demanded Ash to put the disguise back on, so Romeo could practice with the fake Juliet, but Ash refused, claiming that he was tired of dressing like Juliet, and suggested that they just go get the real one, and that Romeo get the real confession over with. Ash and May began to argue about Ash putting the costume back on, although May soon managed to convince Ash to do so, by pointing out that if Romeo could confess to Ash for practice, then he could hopefully confess to Juliet, and if he did so, then he and Juliet would hopefully be able to have a way better performance with their Illumise and Volbeat, without Romeo getting nervous. And Ash, wanting to see the performance in its best form, decided to put the disguise back on, although Romeo now refused to practice with Ash, since he didn't see the point in confessing to a fake Juliet. May managed to force Romeo to confess to Ash, though, although he was still too nervous even to confess to a person in Juliet's disguise. Just seeing anything resembling Juliet made him nervous. This led Brock to step in and try and give advice to Romeo as to how to confess to girls, and Romeo listened intensively, believing that Brock actually knew what he was talking about, but Max warned that no man should take love advice from Brock. Brock ignored Max's comments and stated that he was going to act out what Romeo should do to Juliet, as he went up to Ash, still disguised as Juliet, to demonstrate, going up with a bouquet of roses, and begins to say a whole bunch of nice and flirty comments to Ash, making Ash annoyed, because he realized that Brock had seemingly forgotten that Ash actually wasn't Julie. And Brock then walked up to Ash and got all hard-eyed and actually tried to genuinely flirt with Ash, and chased Ash around the area, trying to confess his love to him and hug him, making Ash scream in fear that Brock would do something more than just hug, as Brock claimed his love for Juliet was much more than he could bear. He had to do something about it. As for May, Max, and Romeo, they were immensely surprised by what Brock was doing, and disgusted, with Romeo weirded out that Brock could have become that obsessed with love to the point where he forgot everything else surrounding him, like he literally forgot who Ash even was. Romeo, May, and Max's shock towards Brock's behavior soon just turns into annoyance, as Brock just doesn't let up. Meanwhile, Juliet was sitting with her Illuminise at her cabin, happy that Illuminise was now feeling better. However, Juliet talked with her Illuminise about how she wished Romeo wasn't so nervous around her, like back when they were kids. And we then see a flashback to when they were younger, fishing at a lake. It was at that lake when Juliet had actually kissed Romeo and asked if Romeo would marry her, and Romeo agreed. Now, why were they not married then? Well, it was apparently because Romeo didn't think Juliet was being serious and thought that she was just joking, which was why they just laughed off the kiss after it happened. Juliet was unaware that Romeo didn't think that she was being serious, and was unaware that that was the reason why Romeo was always so nervous around her, because he didn't think that he had actually earned Juliet's affection yet. Like, he didn't think that they were actually going to get married. Anyways, Juliet then vented to her Illuminise, saying that if she kissed Romeo today, then he would probably be so nervous that he would faint, and Juliet was left to wonder what had changed with Romeo, and why he was so clumsy and nervous compared to when he was younger, wishing that the two of them could have fun without any nervousness involved. Just then, Juliet and her Illuminise looked out her house window to see a light over the lake, which Illuminise and Juliet believed to be a Volbeat. So they went out to go investigate, believing that it could potentially be Romeo's Volbeat. It was then revealed, however, that this light was coming from Team Rocket, as Jesse and James were in their Meowth balloon with the balloon in the air, and the light specifically was coming from Meowth, disguised as a Volbeat on a rope attached to Team Rocket's balloon. And Meowth's disguise was complete, with his ass glowing. And this was what Team Rocket wanted in an attempt to lure the Illuminise to them, so James told Meowth to really act like a Volbeat, and he proceeded to dance around like a Volbeat while singing. As Juliet and Illuminise arrived outside, Juliet told Illuminise to fly towards the light to see what was going on, into the distance, while glowing itself. When Illuminise made it over, it saw Meowth, not a Volbeat, and Meowth laughed, happy that Illuminise had fallen for Team Rocket's trap, as James tosses a net from the Meowth balloon and captures Illuminise inside. With Juliet watching, confused as to what happened to Illuminise, as she saw Illumine's light go out when it was captured in the net. Team Rocket then pulls Illuminise and Meowth into the Meowth balloon, and Meowth takes off his disguise, therefore getting rid of the light from him as well, making Juliet extremely confused, since at first she saw the light rising up into the Meowth balloon, and then she saw it disappear completely. So now, according to her, not only was Illumine's light gone, but so was what she believed to be an actual Volbeat's. Juliet was obviously concerned something happened to her Illuminise, so she started to call out for it, but of course, Illuminise didn't respond. Meanwhile, Romeo was still with Ash and the gang, and he was now practicing, due to being forced by May, with Ash still in his Juliet disguise. Although, he still couldn't even confess anything, even to Ash, leading May to criticize him again, and remind him that he had to be clear, he couldn't be vague. So instead of saying something like, I like you, which he at least managed to do, he had to say, I love you. Romeo was still having trouble, so May reminded Romeo that if he really loved Juliet, then he just had to tell her already. Unbeknownst to Ash and the gang, Juliet had come to Romeo's house to try and ask him about if it was actually his Volbeat that she saw, and what had happened to its light, and was hiding behind a tree when she saw Romeo talking to Ash and the gang, and she had actually overheard Romeo say that he loved her and shit like that, and she blushed, happy about this, obviously. However, as Brock was trying to help out Romeo again, giving him more tips, his girl radar went off because he was such a big simp. He was able to detect if a girl he liked was nearby, apparently, and he knew that Juliet was hiding behind the tree, so he found her and called out to everyone, exclaiming that Juliet was at Romeo's house, and he begins to try and flirt with Juliet, but he then realizes that Juliet being at Romeo's house right now wasn't a good thing, as she could have heard all of Romeo's confessions that he was trying to make. And Romeo knew this, so when Juliet came out from the tree, admitting that she had been there, Romeo got extremely embarrassed, thinking that Juliet had overheard everything. However, Juliet pretends that she didn't hear anything, not wanting to rush Romeo by any means, and besides, she had bigger concerns right now, as she needed to clarify with Romeo if that was really his Volbeat by the lake, as if so, she needed to inform him that something had happened to his light. So, Juliet asks Romeo if his Volbeat was out by the lake a few minutes ago, and was the one that she had saw, but Romeo denies this, exclaiming that all his Volbeat were right here with him, which makes Juliet frightened, as she revealed that her Illuminise had followed a light that it thought belonged to a Volbeat, but now it was missing. Ash and the gang and Romeo were shocked to hear this, as Ash finally took off his Juliet disguise. Brock, seeing how Juliet was frightened, saw the opportunity to get on her good side by comforting her, coming up to her and telling her not to fear, assuring Juliet that he would do everything in his power to find Illuminise. Although May and Ash had their doubts, questioning how Brock planned to do this, with Brock admitting that he had no clue where to even start looking for Illuminise. Thankfully, Romeo at least had a plan, which was to have his Volbeat search the area and track Illumine's scent, with Romeo explaining that since Illumise and Volbeat were such closely related Pokemon species, they could each pick up each other's scent, because their scents were so close to one another. Juliet complimented Romeo on this great idea, and thanked him, finding it hard to not express her love, but she didn't, because she didn't want to rush Romeo into confessing if he wasn't ready. Then, the Volbeat began to search the lake for Illumine's scent, as Ash and the gang, Juliet, and Romeo watched. It took a while, but by daybreak, Beat was the first Volbeat to pick up on Illumine's scent, and he flew off with the other 4 Volbeat behind him, going into the forest. as Romeo followed after his Volbeat and instructed everyone else to follow after him. And eventually, Ash and the gang, Romeo, Juliet, and all the Volbeat emerged from the forest and instead arrived at a cliff, which the Volbeat immediately flew up. Romeo knew that the quickest way to get up the cliff would be simply climbing it, although he warned Juliet that this would probably be too dangerous for most people, so he offered to climb up himself and instructed everyone else to find another safer way up the cliff and join him when they could. Brock was very happy to not have to climb the cliff, instead being allowed to stay with Juliet while Romeo wasn't there, as he offered to make sure that nothing bad happened to Juliet while they looked for another way up the cliff, secretly hoping to get close to Juliet while Romeo wasn't there. Ash then offered to go up the cliff with Romeo, along with Pikachu, and Romeo accepted a little bit of help, as Juliet was shocked by Romeo's sudden courage to be willing to climb the dangerous cliff by himself, as she, Brock, May, and Max all ran to find another way up the cliff. As for Ash, Pikachu, and Romeo, they eventually reached the top of the cliff to find none other than Jessie and James dressed in Volbeat and Illumise costumes. Ash and Romeo were obviously caught off guard by this, especially Ash, when Team Rocket did a different motto based on Volbeat and Illumise, and quickly threw off their disguises, leaving Ash and Romeo scared as Team Rocket hopped into their Meowth balloon and revealed that they had captured Illumise, who was now in a cage under the Meowth balloon. And Team Rocket then admits that they had purposely come to this cliff with Illumise, knowing that Illumise's scent could have lured Ash and the gang and the Volbeat to them. And seeing that the Volbeat had now joined Romeo up on the cliff as well, Meowth laughed as he activated a giant vacuum that they had attached above their Meowth balloon, and the vacuum began to suck things in. Although Ash and Romeo were able to resist, all of the Volbeats, with the exception of Beetle, were forced to try and hold on to Beetle to prevent them from being sucked into the vacuum, although all of the Volbeats lost grip of Beat as Beat watched in horror, and all the Volbeats were sucked inside, with the exception of Beat. Team Rocket were not satisfied with this, as they wanted to capture Pikachu as well, so James ordered Meowth to strengthen the force of the vacuum with a switch in the Meowth balloon, and he did so, which caused the Meowth balloon to suck Ash and Pikachu inside, although they didn't end up going inside the vacuum, instead just getting caught in the nozzle, meaning that the vacuum couldn't suck anything else up, but Team Rocket didn't really care, as they had Ash and Pikachu, and 4 of the Volbeat. Just then, Juliet, Brock, Max, and May had managed to find a hill to go up the cliff, like a little incline, and when they arrived, Ash yelled at Romeo that Team Rocket was so preoccupied with using the vacuum that they likely wouldn't notice if he used Beat to try and free Illumise from his cage. So Romeo took Ash's advice and ordered Beat to use Quick Attack, which smashed into the cage, freeing Illumise. Team Rocket were angered by this, so Meowth managed to fuck with the switch enough to strengthen the vacuum even more, now at its maximum force, which actually sucked Ash and Pikachu inside, therefore freeing the nozzle, so that Meowth could now aim it towards Beat and Illumise, wanting to recapture Illumise and capture Beat as revenge for Beat freeing Illumise in the first place. The vacuum was powered up so much that it was just about to suck Illumise and Volbeat in, and was making the Volbeat, as well as Ash and Pikachu, inside of the vacuum, start to spin around. Although Ash managed to have Pikachu use Thunderbolt inside the vacuum, which short-circuited it, stopping it from working, allowing Beat, per Romeo's orders, to use a double edge on the vacuum to cut it open, freeing Ash, Pikachu, and the 4 Volbeat as they fall to the ground, dizzy as fuck from all the spinning. Jessie refused to give up, though, as she saw that the 4 Volbeat were so dizzy that they could be easily recaptured with the help of her Seviper. So she sent Seviper out and ordered it to go attack and recapture the 4 dizzy Volbeat. However, Juliet then jumped in to save the Volbeat, like how Beat had saved Illumise, and Juliet had her Illumise use Sweet Scent, which attracted the Volbeat all to her, causing Seviper to miss his attack, since the Volbeat weren't in the spot that they were in. Jessie was mad at this, and she got even more mad, as James and Meowth had been affected by the Sweet Scent, as they began to talk about how beautiful Illumise was. Jessie simply tried to ignore Meowth and James, as she just told Seviper to attack the Volbeat again. But before the Seviper could attack, all 5 of the Volbeat, including Beat, as ordered by Romeo, all used Signal Beam at the same time, blasting Team Rocket off. Everyone cheers at the fact that Team Rocket was gone, and Illumise goes up to Beat and kisses it, viewing it as the main hero, much to Beat's joy. Yay, at least Illumise and Beat were together. As for Romeo and Juliet, though, they observed Illumise kiss Beat, and Romeo thought that since Beat had now gotten his love, he felt as though it was finally the perfect time for him to tell Juliet, so he just straight up confessed that he loved Juliet, leading Juliet to admit that she sure thought that Romeo was interested in her, still not revealing that she had discovered this after eavesdropping behind the tree. Brock, totally oblivious to what had just happened, goes up to Juliet and offers her flowers, and declares his own love to her, although Juliet just replies that she was eyeing someone else, which leaves Brock devastated as he drops the flowers and pouts in the corner, away from everyone else. Juliet then admits to Romeo that she loved him as well, and reveals that she was never joking about wanting to marry Romeo and kissing him and shit like that, and asked if Romeo was going to keep his promise to marry her. Romeo was instantly excited by the thought of marrying Juliet, and Romeo obviously blushed immensely and accepted, stating he would marry Juliet right away, leaving Brock extremely crushed as he cries in the corner, leading Ash to state that there will always be other girls for Brock to go after, because he always went after other girls no matter what. And he also told Brock that he could have been rejected in a much more harsh way, and he frankly deserved to be rejected in a much more harsh way than just Juliet saying that there was somebody else she was interested in. Ash, Max, and May then congratulated Romeo on finally confessing to Juliet and having it all work out. with May commenting that she was sure Juliet and Romeo would live a long, happy, sweet life together. Later that night, Ash and the gang had stayed by the lake, awaiting the festival as it soon began, with Illumise and Volbeat beginning their performance, and it was going well, since Romeo now had confidence, not nervous around Juliet anymore. Nurse Joy and several other audience members were at the festival as well, and they all watched as Romeo and Juliet used their batons lit up with red lights to instruct the Volbeats and Illumise to combine to form one giant light, and then the Volbeats and Illumise fly into the air and separate, revealing multiple lights again as everyone stares in amazement. With Nurse Joy pointing out that the Volbeats and Illumise were using tail glow. Ash was happy to see that Romeo was no longer nervous, with May stating that it was due to the power of love having the ability to get rid of nervousness so long as a person confessed their love, and stated that this performance was the perfect ending to this chapter of Romeo and Juliet's love story, even though a new one was about to begin. Ash was annoyed with all this love talk, telling May that she was too obsessed with love, leading May to reply that most girls were, and Ash probably just didn't understand it because he was both a dude and too immature, suggesting that Ash would understand love when he was older. The episode then ends with the Volbeats and Illumise forming a heart with their lights, along with several other light patterns, in addition to a circle, and then finally ending with a Pikachu, which makes the audience applaud, bringing joy to Romeo and Juliet, who were happy that they were able to bring out happiness in people while performing together.